Yes, good morning. You're on the air.
Hey, Al, this is Brian Crawford with the Beer Institute. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. How are you, sir? I appreciate you calling in.
Oh, yeah, happy to do it.
Yeah, we are joined right now on the phone with Brian Crawford, who is the Beer Institute president and CEO. And a lot of people may not know what today is, but Brian is here to talk about it. Today is the 90th anniversary of Prohibition's repeal. Brian, being the Beer Institute president and CEO, has a lot of information about that. Good morning, Brian. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, yeah, I'm really happy to be on. It's a national holiday for the beer industry when we get to celebrate the end of Prohibition, which was an abject failure, and I'm really excited to join you guys this morning.
And do you think, Brian, that it was an abject failure because it was something that the government wanted to do that people didn't want?
Oh, yeah, 1,000%. And unfortunately, we're seeing similar trends right now with neo-prohibitionists who are trying to tell consumers what to eat, what to drink, what to do with their free time. But even back in the 1920s, when this was first passed, there was a movement afoot here in the United States, led by the temperance movement and prohibitionists, who were trying to tell their citizens what they could and couldn't do. And unfortunately, they were able to secure enough seats in Congress to pass the 18th Amendment back in January of 1920. And then we saw what happened, right? You had bootlegging going on. You had illegal activities. It was the same time period. It was the rise of organized crime and other things. And what we saw was brewers actually moved to make other products because they had all of this equipment that they had invested in. So they started producing yeast and ice cream, syrups, and cheese to try to stay in business. And then, thankfully, in December 5th of 1933, the 21st Amendment was finally passed, and our free will was once again bestowed upon us.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think about for a guy like me, prohibition seems like this thing that occurred so long ago that there wouldn't really be ramifications of it going on today. But that's likely not true. One of the things that I'm thinking while you were talking, Brian, is would organized crime be organized crime as we know it today if not for prohibition? I know that's looking a little bit into the crystal ball of what if, but I wonder what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of history written on that movement and the fact that organized crime really began during the Prohibition era, because this was when bootlegging was going on and folks organized themselves to be distributors of illegal hooch, and that sort of propagated itself from the early 1920s during Prohibition through today. I think they've moved on to different products. Actually,
right.
after Prohibition was repealed in 1933, that's when the federal government set up the three-tier system, right, to make sure that brewers, like my members, couldn't sell directly to retailers. So you have a three-tier system where the second tier is distributors, who are the folks that deliver the beer directly to your grocery store, to your local beer store, your convenience store, and so there can't be any funny business that goes on there. And so that three-tier system has worked well for beverage alcohol since Prohibition ended.
Are there things that are happening today that separate beer from liquor that maybe the average person doesn't know or doesn't understand, but really creates a difference internally within the sales of those products?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, one of the main differences from beer and liquor actually stems from Prohibition, because not a lot of people know this unless you're in the beverage alcohol industry, but the Cohen-Harrison Act was a separate piece of legislation that ended prohibition only for beer on March 22nd, 1933. And that was because Congress, in its infinite wisdom, and I say that tongue-in-cheek because there's not a lot of wisdom going on up in Congress right now on Capitol Hill, where I'm currently located. But they recognize the differences between beer and liquor, and they are distinctly different forms of beverage alcohol in the way that they're produced, in the way that they're shipped, in the way that they're consumed. The main difference being that beer is a perishable item, right? Liquor actually grows in its prominence and in its expense the longer it's aged, right?
Yes.
Beer has a shelf life. And so when beer is brewed and it's canned and bottled, there's only a certain period of time while it's still fresh and it's still good, and if not, it needs to be, it is ultimately destroyed. And so that was the main difference. The other main difference is obviously the ABV, right? The average beer is 5% ABV, whereas the average hard liquor drink is 36% ABV. And so when you think about a sliding scale of taxation, what Congress put in place was the higher the ABV, the higher the tax rate. And so beer enjoys a lower tax rate than liquor in large measure because it has a lower ABV price point, a lower ABV point than liquor.
Are you saying, Brian, ABV?
Yes, average, ABV.
Is that a V at the
Alcohol.
end? Like it's volume,
V,
right?
Volume.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what I
correct.
thought. I was having a hard time hearing it, so I just wanted to make sure that the listeners understood what was being said as well. That's okay, not a problem at all. I know you're in Washington, we're in Kentucky, but I wonder, I think when a lot of people think of Kentucky, they think of bourbon. They think of that thing that grows in prominence the longer that it's around. What is the beer industry to Kentucky?
Well, it's a growing industry. The beer industry nationally employs about 2.4 million people, right? And that's not just the people that are working at a brewery. When you think about the number of hands that touch a beer before you enjoy it in your local bar or at home, you've got farmers who are producing the yeast and the barley, the rice and the hops, all of which are key ingredients in beer. And then you've got your brewers, and then we talked about your distributors, and then your retailers, your point-of-sale folks at your local on-premise or off-premise location. But in Kentucky specifically, the beer industry employs just over 21,000 people. We generate $3.7 billion in economic activity and about $1 billion in wages in the state of Kentucky alone. So clearly, when you think about Kentucky as American citizens, you think about bourbon and the richness of bourbon. But you also need to consider just what an enormous economic engine the beer industry is. And that's why we're just so proud today to celebrate on Prohibition Repeal Day the economic engine that is beer, the amazing careers that are found in the beer industry, and just the investment that's being made by beer members across the country in new products. And that's one of the things I want to touch upon is really beer is evolving to become something for everybody. So whether or not you want a really hoppy, higher ABV beer, or if you want something more flavorful, whether it's a sour or something that's infused with citrus, or the newest item that's really getting a lot of hype right now is low and no alcohol beer. And as we approach dry January and everyone's New Year's resolutions, every single brewer in the United States is coming up with new low and no alcohol options for consumers so that you can still have a quote-unquote drinking occasion even though you're not consuming any alcohol. And so we're really excited about that new phenomenon in the beer industry.
It's interesting to hear about how the beer industry is embracing that, because I think a lot of people might see that as a competing industry, but the way that you're approaching it is that it's just an extension of the industry, the non-alcoholic options that are coming along.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that non-alcoholic beer is beer. It is brewed with the exact same ingredients, so it still has yeast, hops, barley, water. But what they do is during the brewing process, they just brew the alcohol out of the beer. So it tastes exactly like your favorite beer. You just won't be consuming any alcohol. But again, it really affords you the opportunity to go to that celebration, enjoy a beer, but not be consuming any alcohol. And honestly, that's a trend line that we're seeing in the beer industry, both across all segments.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear. 90th anniversary of the repeal of Prohibition. I have to say, prior to hearing from your associate Wyatt, I did not realize that this was likely a day that was celebrated. But the more that I prepared for your call and reading different things, it really is. I mean, because that industry would not exist today if not for the repeal.
That's exactly right. That is why today is a great day to raise a beer and cheers your friends, because as you said, if it were not for Congress recognizing that they were wrong and overturning the 18th Amendment, this massive economic engine that is the beer industry would not exist. And so it is a reason to celebrate.
Brian Crawford, President and CEO of the Beer Institute, thanks for making time in Washington to give us a call this morning and share this information about such an important holiday to your industry and beer drinkers all over the country, but especially here in our listening area. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Take care. 7:46 in the morning.